Next on Prairie Sportsman, learn from a Minnesota DNR crappie barotrauma study and explore the problems associated with dumping live bait. And we'll join Nicole Zempel for a fast forage. Hooks and hazards unfold on this episode of Prairie Sportsman. This is Prairie Sportsman. I'm Bret Amundson. Welcome to the show. We got another good one for you, starting right now.
Funding for Prairie Sportsman is provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. Mark and Margaret Yackel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farm, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota, on the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Live Wide Open. Western Minnesota Prairie Waters. And the members of Pioneer PBS.
Welcome to Prairie Sportsman. I'm Bret Amundson. Today we're in northern Minnesota on a small but deep lake, crappie fishing. Most of the fish are 30 to 50 feet deep. If you're going to target crappies that deep, there's some important things you need to know, and in this episode, we're going to tell you what those are.
Kind of loud and clear from our panfish anglers that the next thing they'd like us to focus on is crappie. And we realize that, crappie are found throughout the state of Minnesota, but they live in a huge variety of habitats. So we're trying to learn a little bit more about their biology and about how different lake environments might affect angling. So we're out here on a deep lake today, and we want to understand how does deep water angling impact the crappie population, and what kind of guidelines can we come up with for anglers to help them make a more informed decision when they're out on the water.
With basin crappie fishing being popular among anglers, we wanted to know what effect barotrauma might have on these fish.
Barotrauma has been an interesting topic. There's been a lot of discussion about it, and we're going to figure out some best practices here.
So what is barotrauma? Barotrauma in fish is similar to the bends in humans. When a fish comes up from deep water, it goes through a change in pressure. This change can cause internal damage to the fish. Sometimes it's visible, sometimes it's not. Visible changes include bulging eyes, an expanded swim bladder that pushes the stomach into the mouth, bleeding gills, or gas bubbles under the skin. Sometimes a released fish struggles to swim to the bottom, and even if they do, they still may not survive. We're on a lake in northern Minnesota right now, and we are doing some research for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. We're out here with Lindner Media, Angling Buzz. We're trying to catch some crappies right now and determine the effects of barotrauma in various stages of natural fishing. So we've got different methods of fishing. We've got shorter handling times. We've got different ways to hold the fish, a bunch of different methods we're going to learn about. But first, we got to catch some fish.
One of the things that I think is neat about the work that they're doing out here is that this was really driven by stakeholders. So Minnesota has a number of work groups, typically species specific. So the panfish work group had been raising concerns about this for quite some time. So they were able to do some collaboration with the DNR and develop a preliminary study or pilot project last year to dive into this to see how it might work. And then this year now they're doing a little bit more of a refined approach to the study.
So we kind of expanded on last year's work. The main point of last year's work was just to see if something like this can even be done in the wintertime. We wanted to see if we could even come out and set net pens. Could we catch enough fish? Could we keep gear from freezing in? And we found out that we could. And we were able to do it on 3 different lakes with 3 different depth trials, which started to provide some provocative information that we wanted to continue to follow up on.
This year they're using 3 different methods to study the effects of barotrauma on crappies.
The first method that we're using is catching fish and holding them in pens like we did last year.
2 transport snowmobiles were on standby as anglers fished. Fish! While this wasn't a private lake we were on, there was no public access. Jeremy! And the area residents welcomed us for our study. Fish! I got one. There we go. One thing I also want to mention is you guys took great steps to really reduce the fish handling time.
We did, yeah. We were able to get these fish. We were actually shuttling them over to the net pens using snowmobiles. So a lot of times we were, from the time the fish was caught to the point where it was in the pen was around 30 seconds. So we were moving pretty fast. We made a real effort to cut that handling time down.
The second method also utilized a holding pen, but biologists used a weighted contraption known as a descending device to quickly get fish back down to the depth that they were caught at.
The first pen, we just put fish in, much like we did last year, released them directly into the pen. The second pen, we actually wanted to see if we used the descending device, if that would have much of an impact. For a couple different reasons. First, we hear anglers ask us questions about descending devices or fizzing to see if there's safer ways to release a fish. So we could evaluate that, but we could also try to eliminate any confounding factor of the pen itself. Last year we observed that some fish had trouble getting to depth because they'd run into that net. So we thought, well, if we place them there, that kind of eliminates that risk to the fish, so it should give us a little better question, or a little bit better answer, I should say.
The third method involved an angler catching fish, in this case Jake Wallace from Angling Buzz. As soon as the fish came out of the water, it was quickly unhooked, given a quick once-over, and rated on a scale for barotrauma symptoms, and then released to minimize as much handling time as possible.
There we go. Got one going.
There he is.
Live one here. Boy, Jake really came back with the
Team Blue. He's just a little guy. We got him.
Still counting.
Yep.
Right there at about 39 again.
Yep.
What's this barotrauma? He doesn't look
Not bad.
terrible. He's got a little
Got a
bit
rock
of
in his stomach.
Yeah.
Let's say it's a 2.
I was in a rate of 2. That's how he looks like the last one.
There he goes. All right. You look like you went out and behind me.
That's him right there, huh?
He's still there. And think 35 feet under the ice.
Yeah, so we've been releasing fish with 2 forward-facing sonar units to see if we can track the fish down to depth. What they do they go down? Do they go down the bottom? Do they maintain, or do they float up? And we've had a mix of results so far. We're still working on it, but interestingly, one of the groups over there doing it had one fish they caught in 48 to 50 feet come up stone dead. It came up the hole, was dead and unreleasable. The second fish from 45 feet was released and went down, and they tracked it with both units, and it popped up right away, and they never saw it again. So we actually went over and looked at it with the AquaView camera, and it's right underneath the ice, floated up dead. So we're going to go take a peek at that fish just to show the different variables that are involved with catching these fish out of deep water. Some probably do well, some do okay, and some die. So that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of here.
Not fast by any means. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, he's still fighting it pretty good, right?
Yeah. There he was, wasn't he? Yeah, he's right there.
Right there, yep, there he is.
So that made it all the way down to the bottom, and now it's working its way back up.
He made it to almost 40 feet, and it's
Almost
55, 40. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but he was down, there was another group of fish, and he got down just to them, and now he's
gonna
right at 20.
He's gonna float right up. He's gonna go quick now, I bet.
Yeah.
Hey guys, what are you doing? Hey, where am I going?
Come back. Yep. Not looking good for him.
Oh, he just kicked there.
He did. Wow.
Yeah, it's not.
What did he do?
I think I can.
He was coming up, then he leveled off again at 20 feet.
Now he's going back down.
Wow.
It's like he's got the life, he just doesn't have the
It's amazing and just see them.
You'd really think though, getting down to depth and getting back to
It should just equalize, you would think.
And we saw fish go right back down and seem to be with the school and be all right. We saw fish go right back down and then reach a certain depth and then kind of flutter down. We saw fish float back up. So the technology will really show you a lot, and I hope that whatever they learn from this study, that the citizens and the license holders will be able to say, all right, this is the information we have. This is how we think we should manage the resource, along with this information and input from the agency.
On day 3, it was time to check the holding pens to see how the crappies were doing and employ an underwater drone. The underwater drone, or ROV, was deployed where Jake was fishing the day before. The goal was to try to find the fish that he released to see if they'd made it to the bottom or if they'd floated up and died under the ice.
How do you verify if the fish you immediately let go lived, right? And so, well, some of them might sink to the bottom, but a lot of them we know float up. And do they float up and sit under the ice and recover later? Very possibly. Or do they float up and die? So we just thought we caught a bunch of the fish we immediately released in one little area, so we just took the underwater ROV camera and we flew it around, and we did find a number of dead fish, came right up on them, and they were just stiff and dead under the ice. So it was a percentage of what we actually released. So.
Since no one had been recently fishing in this particular area, it was clear that these were the fish that Jake had caught.
Yep. I don't see anybody walking now, but...
So that's the third fish we've seen.
Correct.
So right now, Mike has the underwater drone out, and they're just looking for dead crappies that have floated up under the ice and are trapped. And they're finding all sorts of fish under there. In fact, when Jeremy was walking around, he found one that actually floated up into the hole and is frozen into one of the holes now. But they've got some forward-facing sonar that they're using to track the drone underwater. And then Jeremy's walking up on top of the ice and following the drone from the forward-facing sonar guys and marking where they're finding all these dead fish. And I think it's been 4 or 5 now or something like that they found. So far, 40 fish caught that you released with the forward-facing sonar.
Yep.
And we found in just, 10, 15 minutes, if that?
6 under the ice and 1 in a hole.
So 7 dead ones.
And that's pretty... Remember, field of view is not that big.
Yeah, right.
Fish,
Yeah, and I mean, it does replicate actual real-world immediate release fishing conditions where, sure, these fish swim down, but some percentage of them don't make it.
After a comprehensive search of the area, it was time to go back and check the pens and try to get some preliminary results. We had live scopes and Lowrance units and Humminbird units all over the place. When you saw that part of the research, that part of the study, was there anything that surprised you or anything that you saw there that stood out?
Yeah, the crew's actually working up the fish right now, so, we're going to have to dig into the numbers, but just general observation, it seemed like about 1/3 of the fish were floating in each of the net pens, so it didn't seem like the descending device made much of a difference. Both of those pens looked the same, and interestingly enough, when the crew came out today and used the underwater drone, they found that about 1/3 of the fish that were captured yesterday, they actually found pinned up underneath the ice. So it seemed like regardless of which method was used, we were finding a similar number of fish that were that weren't able to maintain their depth and were pinned up near the surface. And then both in the pens, in both pens, and also just out here on the open ice, we observed some fish that had apparently died and actually sank to the bottom.
Yeah.
So some fish seem to be released and they swim down and they do just fine. Some fish are released and then end up floating back to the surface, and some fish seem to swim down to depth only to find themselves laying on the bottom. So there's definitely different things that are going on with each individual fish.
And these were some deep waters that we were fishing in,
They were
deeper than last year. We don't have final numbers or final tallies on any of this stuff yet. This is just kind of observations that we've had on what these fish have experienced out here today. But it was really interesting taking that underwater drone out there and seeing those fish pinned up against the bottom of the ice. I mean, it's something you hear about, but without that sort of tech, it's hard to actually see it.
Yeah, and you know, and I'm as guilty as anybody. When I've been fishing, I release a fish and say, well, that fish swam down. I'm sure it was fine. So it was extremely informative to be able to use the forward-facing sonar and track these fish for, in some cases, we were able to track them up to 5 minutes or more. And what we found is there was a delay between the point of that fish descending to depth and where it really started showing signs of trouble and floated back to the surface. So I don't think that in most cases that mortality is instant. It probably occurs after that fish, you know, at least makes an effort to return to depth. But yeah, if you're, you know, I think that fish yesterday that was stone cold dead, I think that was caught in like 50 feet of water. You know, obviously some fish are just instantly killed, but probably that delayed mortality is you know, more common.
And I think it's also important to note that this research is ongoing. Like you're gonna continue to do this. You're gonna continue to try different methods and try to get the best results possible. That's the bottom line. You're just trying to find the best results.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. So we're hoping to add a little bit more precision where we can come up with some, you know, somewhat precise estimates of mortality at given depth. But it'll take more data and more time to do that.
We're not trying to say something's right or wrong. We just want to know if something's happening to let other anglers know so that when they're going out, they have it in their mind that, hey, you know, for these crappies, if you're fishing them super, super deep, there's probably a good chance there's going to be some dying. I mean, I don't know about you, but I run into a lot of guys out on the ice that it doesn't even enter into their mind that they're killing a fish.
This is my opinion, but what I've seen doing this, fishing and with this research, that it makes a lot of sense to me that if you're going to target fish in deep water, it's probably best, again, to just use this as a harvest opportunity, not necessarily recreational fishing to see how many you can put on top of the ice or how many you can catch and let go.
All the fish that were kept in the pens were either sent to the lab for necropsies or sent home with some of the anglers for fish fries. We learned a lot about barotrauma, but more information about this study will be coming out in the future, and of course more studies will continue next winter.
There's also invasive species that can hitchhike in bait buckets in the same way they hitchhike in live wells or ballast water in boats. We know there's lots of infectious agents in the bait supply, viruses.
It's kind of like a cherry tomato meets a grape. We all knew that live bait were really important in the state, that a lot of live bait movement was happening, but it pretty quickly became clear that no one really had a good handle on whether that was a risk for the spread of invasive species and fish pathogens.
It surprises some people to know that the release of unused bait after a fishing trip is illegal. It has been for a long time, and although there's on every fishing license and in the regulation books and signs at boat ramps that tells you not to do it, a lot of people still do.
It's just funny the number of people I would say oh, I'm working on bait fish and, you know, releasing them, and the number of people that say, oh, I dump mine in the water all the time. I think most people really just don't think about it and really don't know about the law or don't understand why it's a law. It's pretty high number.
We know there's lots of infectious agents in the bait supply, viruses, parasites, bacteria. When that pathogen's introduced to something like a walleye or a muskie, it can kill that fish.
I have grown up in Minnesota. I've been around the lakes and rivers my entire life, and as a scientist, I'm fascinated by all of the diseases that are out there. As an angler and as a resident, they're horrifying. It's not fun to think about.
About 10 years ago, a virus called viral hemorrhagic septicemia broke out in the Great Lakes. Huge, massive fish kills, and one of the routes of transmission and spread in this region is through the bait supply. There's also invasive species that can hitchhike in bait buckets in the same way they hitchhike in live wells or ballast water in boats. And some of those invasive species, like silver and bighead carp, look awfully like some of the shiner minnows. that are just sort of bycatch from wild harvested bait.
The majority of Minnesota bait fish are not raised in aquaculture settings or hatcheries. Majority of Minnesota bait fish are harvested from wild sources, which are not typically subject to pathogen testing, biosecurity.
Lots of little fish moving all over the landscape, being introduced to new places introduces risk. And our program here wanted to understand those risks and help managers develop strategies to address it.
In order to reach a really large number of anglers and understand what's going on statewide, we elected to do a large-scale statewide survey. We did 2 surveys, and both of them were a mailed survey invitation. So for the first survey, that was done based on a list of anglers randomly selected from the electronic licensing system, which is the database of all folks that purchased a fishing license in Minnesota. In our first survey, the primary aim of this survey was to simply understand the behaviors that anglers are doing, understand the fish that they're purchasing, the species they typically go for, how many they typically buy, all of the behavior that goes into their fishing in a year.
There's just over 1 million licensed anglers in Minnesota, and from our surveys, we've determined that about 70% of them use live bait fish at least some of the time.
The most popular species were fathead minnows, followed by several species of shiners, and white suckers as well were extremely popular. And folks tended to buy about 2 to 3 dozen fish, but sometimes that number was much higher. The first survey was 4,000 selected from across the state, and we received about a 20 to 25% response rate on that. The second survey we did 8,000, and we received a similar 22% response rate, so about 1,700 surveys came back from the second survey. In the second survey, we really focused on the why of their behavior, things about their attitudes and beliefs. And what we saw largely there was that most anglers want to do the right thing, they're concerned about invasive species, and they're interested in making a difference. But we also found a lot of them lacked knowledge about invasive species regulations, especially related to bait disposal. In both surveys, we found about 20% of anglers that use live bait release it, or have released it at least once in the past year. We found that a much lower number of folks say that they intend to release live bait. The folks that think live bait fish release is the right thing, they most commonly reported believing that it was going to actually be a good thing for the ecosystem. We also found that there were people who reported not wanting to make bait fish suffer in disposing it. That was another reason why they didn't feel like they wanted to put it in the trash can. But the overwhelming majority simply did not know the regulations. When we control for that, when we eliminate the folks that say they don't know the regulations, the percentage of anglers that report releasing their live bait fish plummets to about 2%. And so most anglers who know the right thing do the right thing. I think that messaging tailored to that idea could be really powerful. Pointing to the fact that 80% of anglers in Minnesota do properly dispose of their live bait could be powerful. Or telling folks about the rules and regulations in a way that focuses on the positives rather than on the negative enforcement or regulatory punishments associated with improper disposal could be really powerful, because generally speaking, Minnesota anglers are not acting out of malice, but rather out of lack of awareness or knowledge. I think next step would be looking at the messaging that DNR currently does around live bait fish and understand why that's not translating to knowledge among anglers. I know that they have emphasized clean, drain, dry, and dispose in the past, but I think a broader application of that message to the population could go a long way towards reducing live bait fish release. Some counties have done this work where when you buy a bag of bait, there's a sticker or a message attached to it. When you're right there at the lake, you're getting that reminder or that prompt of bait disposal regulations and recommendations. If we can tell people what they need to know, when they need to know it, at the place they need to know it, that can be really powerful. I think social media can play a really important role here, because social media is increasingly the way that folks of younger generations learn about angling and learn about natural resources. We did find that most younger anglers did not know about regulations and were more likely to release live bait fish than older generations. We do have an ongoing study looking at bait retailers, a very important piece in the puzzle,
We've had a great response from bait shop owners. They want to be part of the solution. And so they do a lot of work to sort of look in those tanks, identify things that aren't supposed to be there, and pull it out. But there's a lot of fish moving around, and not everybody knows what to look for.
There's almost nothing you can do at the point of sale to test for or treat pathogens. It's really just about communicating with anglers at that point.
As we think about the risks and the maybe risky behaviors, it's important that we weigh the benefits too. The baitfish industry is big. There's hundreds of businesses that have license to harvest and grow baitfish. About 1,000 retail locations that sell those bait. It's a multi-million-dollar industry, and it's supporting a multi-billion-dollar recreational fishing industry. I'm an angler. I'm one of those 70% that like to use bait. It's important to the culture here in Minnesota.
We are sitting next to a plant that's actually really easy to just keep walking by because it does sit so low to the ground, probably how it gets its common name, but the ground cherry plant. It is a native plant, and it usually grows ditches, roadsides, along rivers. You're gonna find the ground cherry plant. Now this plant becomes ripe like late October, early November. The plant is toxic with the exception of the fruit. Go for the husks, the little lantern-like husks that are more white. They start out a very deep dark green. They'll end up kind of white and papery. And inside, you'll see it's a yellow fruit. Interestingly, texturally, it's kind of like a cherry tomato meets a grape, and again, can be used in a variety of ways. Now I'm gonna show you, because you want it to be yellow. You can see this one is a yellowing shade, and even more yellow than this would be preferable, but this would be the one to take. So if it's green, let it be. If it's turning yellow, you're good to go.
Funding for Prairie Sportsman is provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. Mark and Margaret Yakel-Julien on behalf of Shalom Hill Farm, a retreat and conference center in a prairie setting near Windham, Minnesota, on the web at shalomhillfarm.org. Live Wide Open. Western Minnesota Prairie Waters. And the members of Pioneer PBS.